They were pioneers in generating terror and violence throughout the country. These guys were the first ones to actually record executions of rival members or what have you, and post it up on YouTube and other social media outlets, which they were just growing at the time. YouTube was just starting at the time, and these guys were the first ones to start doing that, and eventually even ISIS and some of those terrorist groups in the Middle East started doing the same thing. But these guys started it, and they're, I hate to say it, but they were pioneers in terror and fear.
Leo Silva, thank you for your time today, sir. It's an honor to have you on my podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure. It definitely is. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man. Well, we connected over X, and I've had you in my mind for a long time because I've seen you. So I'm a sucker for law enforcement podcasts. I love listening to law enforcement stories. I've listened to you on the Gray Line podcast at least a couple of times. Yeah. And as soon as you popped up, I was like, oh, I got to reach out immediately while this connection is still fresh. So that's my long-winded way of saying, man, it's really nice to have you here. So where I wanted to begin with our conversation, you wrote a book about your time in the DEA as a special agent in Monterrey. You were the group supervisor, and it's based on your experience there. So Leo, for people who are unfamiliar with you, can you please give a little bit of your background and what Reign of Terror is about?
Sure. I grew up in Brownsville, Texas, and it's a city on the border, right on the border with Mexico. Right across the border from us is Matamoros, Mexico. And Matamoros is pretty much the cradle of the Gulf Cartel. That's where it was formed. That's where it originated. So I grew up there, and in the book, I start off by saying, I went to school there. Obviously, I born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, and in my high school years, when I was 14, 15 years old, I went to work with my father at a restaurant, and it was a pretty high end restaurant at the time, and it was the place to go in Brownsville, Texas. And well, all the traffickers from Matamoros used to go there to enjoy the entertainment and the food and just have a good time. So here I am, a busboy, working at the Fort Brown restaurant, serving guys like Juan Garcia Abrego and his minions there in Brownsville, Texas. And I had no clue. Who they were. My dad said, he always told me, when you take care of those guys, just do your job. Don't talk to them. Just don't make them mad. Just do what you got to do and collect your tip money and go home, right? And I figured, well, why? What's the mystery behind these guys? He said, look, he said, they're like mob guys. He said, just don't bother them. Do your job. That's it. So that's what I did, but I was curious, I was always curious, who are these guys? I mean, one time they came into the restaurant and the head waiter, the head waiter says, hey, kid, go over there and get that table that's sitting there, the table of 8 or 9 people, and tell them they're going to have to move because, we've got some important people coming in. And who was it? Well, it was Juan Garcia Abrego and his people. And I said, wait a minute, man, how am I going to go tell these guys this table to move? He said, well, just go do it. I'm going to take care of these people over here. So I was, in the best way I could at 14 or 15 years old, I told them that they had to move. And later the head waiter comes by and says, we're very sorry about this inconvenience. The manager's going to send you a bottle of wine, courtesy of the house, so they moved and they didn't make any noise or anything because, well, I guess they knew who was coming in, right? So, but that's the kind of place that I grew up in. But I was curious always as a kid, who are these guys? But of course, I didn't ask any questions beyond, what, my dad and my grandfather sometimes. And that's where I grew up in Brownsville, Texas. And when I went to college, I was studying to be an English teacher. I studied literature. I did the Shakespeare and the Steinbecks and all those things. So yeah, that's what I wanted to do when I graduated college, become an English teacher. So at the time, my mom was working at a law firm, and one of her coworkers was married to a DEA agent, and he took a liking to me because of my ability to speak both languages fluently. So he started recruiting me, you can say, and in 1985, that's the year I graduated. This Enrique Camarena was kidnapped in Mexico.
Yeah.
And that was the defining moment where I made my decision. I'm not going to be an English teacher. I'm going to try to pursue this. And if I don't make it, well, I can always come back and be a teacher, right? So,
yeah.
So in 85, I graduated college, applied for the DEA, and it took a year for them to respond and tell me that I had been hired. So I go into the academy of February of 87, and we went through 3 months of training. And then my first assignment was in McAllen, Texas, back to the border, right? So it was quite an experience, quite a ride. And I had 28 years of service with DEA. I spent in McAllen, then I got transferred to Guadalajara, Jalisco in 2001 to 2004. Then I promoted to a supervisor, and I came back to McAllen, Texas, and did another 3 years, and then went back to Mexico in Monterrey, where I finished my career. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, man.
Yeah, it's more than a nutshell. There's a lot there. Your book, Reign of Terror, explores the Los Zetas Cartel, and you were stationed in Monterrey right at the height of their power. First of all, I mean, Leo, I texted you this today, but I'll say it on the recording. You got balls of steel, man. Like if somebody came to me, if I was in the DA and they said, "Hey, we're going to throw you right into the heart of this thing. Oh, and by the way, you're in a place where as a civilian, you can't carry a firearm legally. So You're going to have to figure this thing out." I'd be like, "Yeah, no, fuck you. I'll stay put where I'm at. I'm good. I'll do janitor duties." So that's first and foremost. But Leo, can you talk about Los Zetas? Like, what are they? How were they formed? And how powerful were they at the peak of their power?
Sure. So the Zetas were created by the leader of the Gulf Cartel at the time, who was Ociel Cárdenas Guillén. The Ociel inherited the Gulf Cartel from Juan Garcia Abreu after he got captured, and Ociel was just a different kind of person. He was very paranoid, always looking over his shoulder, thinking somebody's going to kill him, and take over his spot. So he was extremely paranoid. I mean, to the extreme. And on top of that, he was addicted to cocaine. So that just enhanced his paranoia, man. So,
yeah.
So he wanted a security detail that was going to be exceptional, So he hires this guy who's a former special forces guy for the Mexican Army, Arturo Guzman de Sena, and he was known as Z1, Zeta. And he did a couple of jobs for Ociel, and he said, "Man, you know what you're doing, man. So can you hire other guys like you to work for me?" So he did. He went and recruited 30 other guys that were all trained, all special forces guys, trained in counterterrorism, sniper, explosives, you name it, man. I mean, special forces guys, not just a run-of-the-mill guy off the street, man. So these guys were highly trained individuals, and they became Ociel's security force. So he has them. They helped him in a war against a rival in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, and they got people's attention. So Ociel gets arrested in 2003, and that's when the Zetas started kind of coming to realize that, hey, we can become our own organization. So it took a while. They stuck with the Gulf Cartel until around 2007. In 2008, they started to break off and go on their own. And that's about the time that I get to Monterrey in 2007. And one of the Zeta leaders at the time was a guy named Miguel Treviño Morales, Z40, Z40. And he was the most ruthless human being that I've ever come across. I mean, you talk about El Mencho, and you talk about this guy he takes the prize, man. I mean, I'm not glorifying it or anything. It's just there's just no other way to describe it, you know. So in 2007, I get selected to be the resident agent in charge of the Monterrey office. And I get there, and my boss from Mexico City says, "I want you to come up here for a meeting. You know, I have some things I want to go over with you." When I get up there, he says, "Leo, this is going to be your mission. I want you to take down Miguel Treviño and Heriberto Lescano, who were the number one and number two of the Zetas at the time, leaders." He says, this guy Treviño has killed a couple of our counterparts that we're very close with. Your mission is to get him. So that's why we got you here. So go get him. So I go to Monterrey, and, you know, it's not something that you can just do overnight, man. It took a lot of planning, a lot of teamwork with our guys here in Monterrey, and developing counterparts that we really could trust to help us achieve that goal. So that's pretty much how it is. So the Zetas grew from just being pretty much a security team to its own independent cartel.
Yeah, and so for the audience who might not be aware, Zeta is the letter Z in Spanish, and the reason why they called themselves that is because their call names as special forces were always Correct. Z. So Correct. The first leader of the Los Zetas was Z1, right. And then it went on and on and on from there, right? Right. Now, what makes these guys especially dangerous is that Mexico's special forces are trained by Israeli and United States special forces. So these aren't like bums hanging out in your backyard with an AK-47. These are trained killers. Correct. And they established themselves through just the most gruesome, brutal acts of violence, right? I mean, they took it to a new level, right?
Absolutely took it to a new level. And I hate to say this, but it's the truth. There's really no other way to put it. They were pioneers in generating terror and violence throughout the country. These guys were the first ones to actually record executions of rival members or what have you, and post it up on YouTube and other social media outlets, which they were just growing at the time. YouTube was just starting at the time, and these guys were the first ones to start doing that, you know, and eventually even ISIS and some of those terrorist groups in the Middle East started doing the same thing. But these guys started it, you know, and they're, I hate to say it, but they were pioneers in terror and fear.
Right. So these aren't just trained killers. These are sadistic, brutal murderers, bloodthirsty savages mostly, right? I mean, these guys are animals. And now you are enlisted to go down there into the heart of this in Monterrey, which is, it's the second largest city in Mexico, I believe, correct?
Correct. It's pretty much the industrial hub of the country. You know, you have a lot of major companies there, a lot of foreign investment in Monterrey from Japan and Korea and the United States and Germany, all over, places from all over the world, countries from all over the world invest and have companies there. So it's a very important state for Mexico, you know, financially and just industry wise. Where we lived, there's a community down there, San Pedro Garza, which has the highest per capita millionaires in all of Latin America. So, I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, there's some big money coming through there, and these guys knew it. And to them, they were just like licking their chops, man, you know, saying, well, we've got a big opportunity to make some money here. So, and they were there in Monterrey. So.
That's right. And with Los Zetas, like, not only are they terrifying to the average person, but they're terrifying to the other cartels as well, right? I mean, when they arrive, a lot of the brutal images that we've seen as outsiders, observers, things you may have seen on the internet or in magazines and stuff, most of that was Los Zetas assassinations, right?
Yes, back in those years, it was them definitely, and the difference was that, again, these guys are highly trained people, highly trained individuals, and whereas the other cartel members, like let's say Sinaloa or Tijuana or other cartels like that, they didn't have that training, that specialized training. I mean, these guys planned operations, surgically. They were planning was a big part of the way they executed their operations. So just like a special forces guy would do, so that's what made them stand out from the other guys.
Yeah, just highly organized,
Right.
trained. And so you arrive in Monterrey, and your task is take down the top of this, I mean, probably the most fearsome organization anybody could ever face. What's your first weeks and months like in Monterrey? I mean, do you have any apprehension about what you're doing down there, or is it, okay, this is the job, let's just go?
Well, you do have the apprehension, but you're there to do your job, and we have a team, and it wasn't just DEA. We had FBI down there, and ICE, and ATF, and then we have to develop the correct counterparts that were going to help us in this mission, right? Because we can't do it on our own. As a U.S. law enforcement official, we have no power in Mexico because it's not our country. We're guests in their country, so we have to do what they say. And if we want to conduct an enforcement operation, we have to go through them. We can't do it on our own. So we had all those things that we had to take into account. Who are we going to find if we need to do an operation? So initially, we have a vetted team in each office of DEA in Mexico. But our vetted team consisted of 5 guys. So if you want to do an operation against somebody like Miguel Trevino or some of his regional bosses, 5 guys ain't going to cut it. So what these guys did is there's a special unit in the federal police, and they're called the Special Operations Group for the federal police. So we eventually were able to hook up with them. But leading up to that point, we had to develop the intelligence that we needed to actually do something, right? We had to, okay, who is Miguel Trevino? Who's his family? Just the basic legwork that any investigator would do, right? And we identified his regional boss in Monterrey, because the Zetas are like a corporation. You have Miguel Trevino up here as the CEO and Heriberto Lazcano, and then you have, okay, you're going to be in charge of the Monterrey office, you're going to be in charge of Merida, and they have a boss in each major city in Mexico. And in our city, it was a guy named Sigifredo Nájera, and they called him Canicon, which means big marble. Why? I don't know. I don't know how these guys come up with the nicknames, man. Some of them are actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
And you can read it in my book. There's some real funny nicknames that they have in there for some of these guys, So we identify El Canicon, and we identify a couple of houses and places that he frequents. So in 2008, October 2008, we're still in this planning stage, but we have identified some locations for him. And all of a sudden, our U.S. consulate building there in Monterrey gets attacked.
Yeah.
They launched a couple of grenades at our building, fired up the entrance of the building with AK-47s, shot it up. And that was the start, man. That's when the gloves came off. That's when we said, okay, now it's on, because you attacked a U.S. facility. And, like Dirty Harry used to say, well, we ain't just going to let you walk out of here, are we? So we said, well, we already have these locations. Let's go ahead and strike back. Let's go hit these locations and see what happens, So there was a warehouse that we had identified in downtown Monterrey, in the industrial area of Monterrey. And we took that team that I spoke about earlier, the Special Operations Group for the Federal Police, and they went and hit the warehouse at 3 in the morning, 3, 4 in the morning. And guess what? We find like 9 tons of marijuana inside that warehouse, and a stash of grenades and some other weapons. And like I said earlier, we had different agencies that were helping us at the time. And one of those agencies was ATF. And as they're looking through the grenades have lot numbers, like serial numbers. So he was able to tell that the 2 grenades launched at our office were part of the lot number that was in this crate of grenades found at that warehouse. So right there, that directly tied him in. And we could say Canicon and his people threw those grenades at our consulate. It was a definite tie-in. So, like I said earlier, it was on. So there was a second location, a residence, and the team goes there. And now the Mexican army joins us in the fun. And the minute they drive up to the residence there in Monterrey, they're met with gunfire. I mean, and Canicon and another guy, they bust out of the garage with this armored vehicle. I mean, they bust the door down. They don't even open the door. They just crash through it. And the gunfight is on, and he escaped. He escapes that day, but we shook his cage, so that's when everything started. And I usually like to point at that moment as saying, that incident when they decided to launch those grenades at our office, that was pretty much the beginning of the end for them.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Leo, I want to talk a little bit about Kiki, because I think that people need to understand why this is such a sensitive issue. Can you tell us who Kiki was and what happened to him?
Enrique Camarena was a DEA agent assigned to Guadalajara in the 80s. He was kidnapped by what was then known as the Guadalajara cartel, who was led by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. These guys were at the time the biggest traffickers in the world, so, and they were getting their cocaine from both the Medellin and the Cali cartel and distributing it to the United States. I mean, they were top dog at the time. And Camarena, being the investigator that he was, located a ranch that Caro Quintero was overseeing, and I don't remember how many acres, but it was acres and acres and acres of marijuana, specialized marijuana that he had grown, because he had studied, agronomy in Mexico, believe it or not, and he grew out in the middle of this desert, the sinsemilla grass that was very popular in the United States at the time. And Enrique Camarena located that ranch, and they destroyed it. They burned it down, right? So Rafael Caro Quintero was upset. And those guys, they had the concept that they do of law enforcement, and they equated it with the same way law enforcement is seen in Mexico, which is nothing. If you're a law enforcement officer in Mexico, you really aren't, held in high esteem, So they figured, well, who's this policeman going destroying our cash crop, So they thought it would be easy to just kidnap him and do what they do to other policemen in Mexico. But their mistake was that, he's a U.S. agent, and DEA and any federal law enforcement agency, if you take one of our guys, we're never going to stop until, we find you and hold you accountable. So they didn't take that into account when they kidnapped Enrique Camarena. And the backlash from the United States government was huge. I mean, I think they closed the border down at the time, and there were long lines of people trying to cross into San Diego and, El Paso and down here even in Texas. And it caught their attention. And especially the high level politicians down in Mexico. So uh, he was a hero, but it was unnecessary. His death was unnecessary,
Yeah.
you know, and it's something that if you're a DEA agent, you're never gonna forget, and you should know that story if you're a DEA agent, and I think they teach that story in the academy. So yeah.
Yeah, and as you're down there in that capacity as a DEA agent and a supervisor, right? I mean, you're heading up the office. Obviously, the Los Zetas and everybody in the area who's doing anything that they shouldn't be doing knows who you are. They're all aware that you're there. Is there a bit of a protective bubble around you because of that experience? Because they know that if you fuck with an American agent, that all hell is going to break loose. Are they aware of that? And does that take some of the pressure off of you?
Yeah, they are aware of that, but it doesn't take the pressure off because you always have that that in the back of your mind, like, well, are they just gonna stop honoring that unspoken agreement? You just never know. And so we were always aware of that, and we didn't let our guard down because of that unspoken agreement, right? We always had our guard up. I mean, especially after the grenade attack,
Yeah.
things just got really intense, and not only for law enforcement agents, everybody in the consulate community at the time was in fear, man. Because you never know what these guys are thinking or what's going to happen or what's going on in their head. So yeah, it was some very very anxious times. And we eventually were able to catch Canicon. It took us about 6 months before we finally caught up to him. And in that 6 month time frame, right after we seized the dope and the grenades and the shootout happened, he went into hiding, but he ordered his minions to surveil the military base in Monterrey. And every time a young soldier was going out on leave or whatever for the weekend, they would kidnap him. And they ended up killing 9 soldiers, 9 young guys,
Oh.
torturing them, slitting their throat, and throwing them in the river there in Monterrey. And when they did that, again, that's another mistake that the Zetas made. The general at the time in Monterrey called our office. He called and set up a meeting with us because he wanted to form an alliance with us, which was unheard of at the time because those guys. I was in Guadalajara prior to my assignment in Monterrey. Those guys would not give you the time of day back then. But now, when this incident happens, 9 other guys are dead, killed by the Zetas. They called us. They told us, we know you guys have the best intelligence, and we want you to help us, avenge our guys. And so we had a common goal, and we formed a really good alliance, and that's what helped us succeed in many of these operations.
Yeah. Now I got to ask you, because Mexico is a country that is notorious for corruption in the police, military, political class. You're there, trying to track these people down. Your life is at risk at all times. And once again, I want to say this: you are legally, technically, not able to carry a firearm. So what is the vetting process like to figure out who you can and cannot trust within these organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. You just have to wing it pretty much sometimes, and,
Wow.
and test them, and see. Well, in the case of the army, the soldiers, we knew that we had a good ally because they had a goal, a common goal, and we knew that they weren't gonna sell us out because they wanted that guy as bad as we did. So, and because they were forthcoming and sharing their information with us, which they never did before, we could pretty much tell that they were on the up and up. Corruption is everywhere in Mexico.
Yeah.
Cops don't get paid enough. Politicians are corrupt. And an old agent told me a long time ago, said, dude, they're all corrupt. Sometimes you just have to shake hands with the devil and try to get the job done. Even though they're corrupt, at some point they're going to give you something that you can use. So I mean, it's like walking a tightrope, man. You have to do it, and hopefully, you'll get a good outcome from it.
Yeah, so you get grenades thrown at your office. The Mexican military steps in. I believe it's at this point, after those 9 soldiers are dead, that they bring in Mexico's Marines to assist you guys, right?
No, that came a lot later.
Okay.
So we had this run with the Army, very successful run with some of the operations, and I outline it all in my book.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where you get to be so successful that people start noticing. So they transfer the general to some other area. The colonel that we were used to working with, also they transferred him somewhere else in Mexico, and our little team broke up. And the new guys that came in to replace him, they didn't have the same motivation that these other guys did. The 9 soldiers that were killed, they didn't know him, they didn't interact with him, so it wasn't really something that they put on their list of priorities. So we saw that there was a change in attitude, and we tried to do an operation again on one of the regional plaza bosses down there, and they basically told us, we're not going to do it because those guys are heavily armed, and we're not going to take the risk. That's what the colonel at the time told us, or the guy in charge of the team. So we were pretty much back to square one. What team are we going to use? And the same thing happened with the federal police that we were using, the special ops guys from federal police. Those guys got transferred, promoted, and that team broke up. So now we're sitting, and then we're like, man, we know where this guy is, and he's another dangerous, highly dangerous individual that we want to take off the streets. But we had no team. So that's when we were able to team up with the Mexican Marines. And then this was just luck, man. I ran into an old friend in McAllen, and he says, dude, man, I have this guy, and he's been calling me. My friend was in McAllen, and there's really nothing he could do with this Navy guy that was calling him. And he said, look, man, I'll tell my friend from Monterrey and see if he's interested. And when he told me about it, I said, well, yeah, we're interested, man. I mean, we've never used them before. We don't know what they can do or what they're capable of, but right now I'm willing to take a chance on anything. So we met with them. Our team met with them in Monterrey, and they pretty much told us, we've got all these capabilities, and we think we can handle it. We're ready to come in and start doing some of these operations. So we had already located this guy that we wanted. His name was Gory, El Gory. That's another nickname. And the reason they call him Gory is it's Gori, and it's short for gorilla. So because he looked kind of like a gorilla, so they call him, instead of saying gorilla, they said, let's just call him Gory. So he was another ruthless individual. He had killed an army general also, and killed a couple of chiefs of police.
Wow.
So we had this guy located, but we didn't have a team. And when we found the Marines, we said, well, here's this target package. This is where he is. And then when you let us know that you're going to go ahead and do the operation, we can keep monitoring his whereabouts, so we can confirm that he's there at that location. So that, he doesn't get away. So we thought, oh, man, it's going to take him a week or 2 weeks even to get back to us. Man, within 48 hours, those guys are like, we're ready to go. So let's get ready and let's do this. And they went and they did it, and they took him out. They took him out, and it was like something out of a movie scene, man, because a lot of those guys started scrambling inside that compound that they were in, and they took off in a Suburban, and there was ongoing shootout, and in the streets, and it was around Christmas time, and you have all these Christmas inflatables, the snowman and the Santa Claus, and they all got shot up, So, uh, it was crazy. But those guys at that moment showed us they are the real deal, man.
Yeah.
And they took Gory out and arrested, like, I don't know, 16 SETA members, killed another 12, and it was messy, but they got the thing done, and we were highly impressed. So that happens in December of 2009. And then, like, maybe 2 weeks later, or a week later, not even 2 weeks, a friend of mine from Mexico City calls me and says, "Hey, man, that team that you just used, do you mind if we call them and use them?" I said, "Dude, this is not my team. They're for everyone. So call them up." I gave him the number, and he called them up. And they conducted an operation in Mexico City. Well, not Mexico City. It was Cuernavaca, Mexico. It was outside of Mexico City, on Arturo Beltran Leiva, who was a kingpin at the time. The Beltran Leiva organization was huge, and they had him located. So they used the Marines to go after him, and they took him out. So,
wow.
I mean, yeah, and I'm talking Arturo Beltran Leiva was huge, man, and they took him out. And that, since then, ever since those initial operations, the Navy became the go-to team, man, for us down there. I mean, these are guys that caught Chapo Guzman and all these high-level traffickers, man. So, yeah, it was impressive, to say the least.
Well, yeah, and I mean, just to put things in context here, these aren't like street gang members. These are highly sophisticated organizations, as you said earlier, like Los Zetas operated as a corporation, right? The Sinaloa cartel operates on a major scale,
Right.
so this isn't just going out into the streets and arresting a couple of crack dealers.
No.
You're basically invading a country unto itself when you're going after these guys, right?
Well, these guys, the good thing is these guys are pretty much defending their own country, and they're putting their skills to use, proactively by going after these enemies to public safety. So they're doing their duty, and we're helping them. We're helping them do it. So, but like I say, it was impressive. There was I'll just go off of base a little bit, and I'll tell you a little story.
Yeah,
there was a low-level SETA leader, right? He was, he wasn't a regional boss or nothing. He was one of the street bosses, but he was violent, and he had engaged in several shootouts in the area. And we got word that he was at a medical clinic because he had, I don't know, something wrong with his foot or something. And I think his foot was highly infected. He had been hit with a round or something, had gangrene or something. He was in this clinic in this, suburban area, residential area. And so, how are we going to get in there without, going into a big shootout with these guys and getting some innocent people hurt? The Marines said, "Let us handle it. Just give us a location." We gave them the look. These guys went out on a helicopter. They rappelled out of the helicopter and into the clinic, got him, snatched him up, took him out, put him in the helicopter, and flew him to Mexico City. I mean, it was quick. These guys didn't even know what hit them, man. So that's the level I'm talking about of professionalism these guys have.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, you have this team of Marines who are, I mean, even with them, it's like, they're part of an organization unto itself that has corrupted elements within it. Like, that's the tricky thing about Mexico and just Latin America in general, is that the corruption is so endemic that even yourself as an agent, as an individual, as a soldier, a Marine, whatever you are, you don't even know if the guy standing next to you is on the cartel payroll or not. So, like you said, you're just winging it like 90% of the time and just praying you don't end up in the back of a pickup truck, right?
Right. Well, when we first made contact with the Marines, and my friend introduced us to them, they had never been used before in an operation, in a land operation in Mexico. They had done, offshore operations, with Marine vessels, but not on land, So that was the novelty of it. It's like, man, are these guys going to be able to do this? And man, they did, and they're still doing it to this day. So that's quite of an accomplishment there.
Badass dudes, man. So,
Yeah, they
Leo,
really are.
you retired in 2015. At the end of your career, did you guys successfully take down and apprehend most of the top of Los Zetas? Because I know that they started to fall apart around that time as well.
Right. So I'll explain it. So what our strategy was is we knew we were not going to get Miguel Trevino and Heriberto Lascano from one day to the next. So our strategy was to chip away at their leadership structure. Like I said, they have regional plaza bosses throughout the country. And in Monterrey, there's a lot of suburbs in Monterrey. So we started taking each one of these guys out, either arrested or they were killed in gunfights or what have you. And it got to the point where when they would assign a Zeta to be the plaza boss in Monterrey, they didn't want it. So no, man, I don't want to be the plaza boss. These guys are going to get me, man. So that's when you know you're having an effect, man, because when they're afraid, when they're scared, that's when you know. We were making some headway, and that's how eventually the Zetas got destabilized because the leadership structure got taken away, and the guys who replaced those leaders were not as experienced as the other guys, and things just started falling apart after that. And when we finally got Miguel Trevino, the Z40, the one that my boss told me this is your mission. What happened is his circle started closing. So you have the Navy after him, you have the Army after him, federal police, DEA, and not only the law enforcement entities in Mexico, but then you have El Chapo Guzman, you have all these other cartels that are trying to kill him. Some of his own people were trying to kill him because they thought he gave information that led to the death of Heriberto Lascano. So he had all these people that were after him, and his circle was closing, man. So when we finally caught him in 2013, he was sleeping in on the ground in ranches, in rural areas. He couldn't check into a hotel, or there was no Airbnbs at the time, but he couldn't do that because he was so high profile, and somebody was going to dive him out because there was a $5 million reward on his head. So that's what helped us get him, because he pretty much had nowhere to run. And one of the final chapters in my book is called Nowhere to Run, because that's really what it was for him. He had no place to go, and his options had run out. And we always thought when we catch this guy, it's going to be a huge gunfight. He's going to go down fighting, and it wasn't that way, man. He threw up his hands and said, "You got me," and that was it. And he did try to bribe the Marines that caught him. I believe he had 2 duffel bags with $1 million each in each duffel bag. And he said, "That's yours if you let me go." And no, they didn't let him go. So, and the most rewarding part is, he spent, I don't know, maybe 12 years in jail in Mexico. And last year he was, they call it extradition, but he wasn't extradited. He was expelled from the country. He was among the, I think it was 27 inmates that were brought over to the United States last year to face charges in the United States. And that's where he is. He's in Washington, D.C. right now. He's in solitary confinement, awaiting trial. He's facing numerous charges. And last I heard, and I think I put it out there on LinkedIn or one of those channels, that he's not having a good time in jail, and he's complaining about the conditions. So, I'm glad it's kind of rewarding, but I'm not gonna, wave the victory flag until the jury convicts him and sentences him to either life in prison or death.
Yeah, and for people who are unaware, prison for cartel bosses in Mexico is not like prison for cartel members in America. I mean, they got stripper poles and they're let out for the day with the expectation that they'll be home back in jail at the right time. Like they're having a great time in jail in Mexico, right?
I visited a jail in Guadalajara. One of supposed to be the high security jail, and that's the one where Chapo escaped the first time. And you had a mariachi band playing inside the jail. You have guys selling, like belt. Hey, sir, I'll say this belt. It's brand new. We just made it. Boots. What's your size? It's like a market in there also, man. So yeah, it's not really like a U.S. jail. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the conditions aren't the best. It's still jail, but they still have access to their families. There's conjugal visits with their wives if they want, or girlfriends, or what have you.
Yeah.
So, they still have the comforts of the good life.
I could see how they're a little bit disappointed when they're extradited to the United States and go to a real prison, right?
And I'll just make an analogy. That's why Pablo Escobar did not want to come to the U.S. because he did not
Right.
want to face those conditions. And it's the same thing with these guys. And now you have Chapo Guzman complaining about the conditions in the Supermax prison in Colorado, and Z40 is complaining about his conditions in Washington D.C. So that's why these guys don't want to come over here, because this is a real jail.
Yeah, there's no lobster and prostitutes in prison in Denver, right? So Leo, I gotta ask you, you spend all those years chasing these guys down, and you finally get the big dog that you were after the whole time. What's that feeling like when you get that call? We got him.
It was ecstatic. I was ecstatic, but at the same time controlled, because it's not over yet until he's in the U.S.
Yeah,
and he's going to face a jury, man. So yes, yeah, it was great. It was very rewarding, but it's not over when they catch him, because before they brought him over to the U.S., he was on the verge of getting released from a Mexican jail. He had a variety of charges on him in Mexico, and his lawyer was able to get all those charges dismissed except for one. So he had one charge remaining, and they were in the process of getting that one charge dismissed, and he would have been back out on the streets. But it was preempted by this unofficial extradition that happened in February of last year. So now he's here in the cold weather up in DC. So
yeah, no more stripper poles. So I want to take this up to present day, because of course, in recent news, El Mencho was killed during an extraction attempt,
yeah.
and Leo, what is the difference between, say, for example, the CJNG, the New Generation Cartel, versus a group like Los Zetas? Is there much difference between them?
There isn't much, but there is a difference. The Cartel de Jalisco is more structured, I would say. They had a larger presence. I mean, Cartel de Jalisco is the name is new, but the history goes back a long ways. I'm talking since the 80s. These guys have been around for a while. It's just evolved up to this point to where Mencho became the leader. But these guys have been around a long time, so there's not much difference. They copied the Zetas, modus operandi by having this paramilitary enforcement type wing in their organization, just like the Zetas did, and they're getting trained also by individuals from Colombia and South America to train their members. So there's not much difference, but they're just bigger, and their presence is in pretty much every state in Mexico, whereas the Zetas didn't have that type of presence. So yeah, I mean, these guys are a lot bigger. There's more of them, and they're highly structured, and they're also highly trained. So yeah, there's not much difference really.
So what does losing El Mencho mean for that organization? Because like with Zetas, for example, like you went from Z1 to Z3 to Z15 to Z40 to Z42, and the thing is as you guys were picking off the leaders, the expertise dwindles, right? And that's kind of what happened to Zetas, is they break into different groups because that structure is no longer there, that military structure that they originally began with.
Right.
So with CJNG, is it a similar situation where, you know, now Mencho is taken out of the picture, somebody else is put in his place, and it's just a slow weakening of the organization over time?
Not in this case, because in this case you have some people that were pretty much groomed by Elemental for this day. I mean, these guys, you know, I'm 90% sure these guys had a contingency plan and said, listen, if something happens to me, you're gonna be the guy that's gonna run the show, and I'm sure he's gonna tell everyone this is the way it's gonna be. And I think they already had a plan in place, and I think there's already unofficially his replacement has been named, and it's his stepson, Juan Carlos Valencia. So I think in the case of CJNG, it was different because he was already grooming for this moment. These other guys, these young guys in his organization, for this moment exactly, you know. So, and the Zetas didn't, you know, they didn't do that. There was no one person that they said, hey, look, if something happens to me, you're going to take over. Yeah. So I think that's the main difference here between both organizations.
Now, I want to talk about the current leadership in Mexico, because you have Sheinbaum is the president, and she tends to give very mixed messages on the cartels, depending on who she's speaking with. You know, I saw her give a speech where she said that, you know, going after them would be inhumane. Yet yes, she's made this commitment to President Trump that they're going to crack down on organized crime in Mexico. So it seems like she speaks out both sides of her mouth quite a bit. What's your view on her? Do you see her as somebody who is potentially compromised, or do you see her as somebody who's trying to do the right things?
Well, if she were trying to do the right thing, she would have done it a long time ago. And what basically, in my opinion, is that she's just extending the policy that her predecessor had. You know, AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He had this policy of hugs, not bullets. You know, the traffickers are human too, and we've got to treat them as such. You know, never mind that they just decapitated 10 people. You know, they have their rights too. So that was their philosophy, and she's carrying that on. But there's now extreme pressure from the United States, from the Trump organization, from the Trump administration. And the difference is that now the organizations, the narcotics organizations, have been named as terrorist organizations. And that is a huge difference. Huge. When I was down there, they didn't have that designation, right? So, and they didn't want to put that designation on them for whatever reason. But when they put that terrorist label on them, the game has changed, you know, and the other strategies that were used in the past, you know, diplomatic channels, you know, economic sanctions never worked. Well, now let's try this, you know, and let's see what happens. And it seems to be taking effect, and it's definitely affecting her decisions as the leader of Mexico.
And from what I understand, this operation against El Mencho was a joint operation between United States Special Forces and Mexican Special Forces. And I've heard a number of people speculate that there is a potential for the U.S. to go kinetic against the cartels in Mexico. Do you see a scenario like that playing out?
Well, that's always a possibility. I think it's something that's we're not there yet. I think it's going to be in the future. But I think with this exhibition of force that was used in this operation, I mean, people are they're on notice. You know, they know that something like this is imminent if something doesn't change. And when I say something doesn't change, well, you know, like I said in the past, with the AMLO, you know, administration, and now Claudia Sheinbaum, there's no law. It seems like there's no law in Mexico. There's no consequences for these traffickers that commit these crimes, you know, that are killing innocent people, and to the point where they're afraid to go out to take a walk in the park with their kid, you know. So, I mean, it's gotten to that level, and that has to change. And the
Mhm.
only way it can change is if there's consequences for these
Yeah.
guys that are committing these acts, you know.
So what we know now, I mean, I'm in Canada, and through the work of investigative journalist Sam Cooper, we have come to learn in Canada that the cartels are operational here, and they have been for some time. And you see, in Canada, we're fairly isolated in all ways, culturally, everything. And so we kind of live in this fantasy world where nothing like that exists here. That's a problem that's isolated to Mexico. Most Canadians aren't even aware that cartels are really operational in the United States. During your time with the DEA, Leo, were you aware that this thing had gone international and spread beyond Mexico and the United States?
Oh, sure. I mean, Europe is a big market for them, as well as Canada, and I'll tell you why. Canada, well, Vancouver has a huge port there, and you can bring chemicals in from China and other countries that that helps them manufacture the methamphetamine and the fentanyl pills. And so, yeah, Canada is a key country for them, and these guys are going to exploit any opportunity they can get to make more money. And when I was down in Monterrey, there was a lot of people that left Mexico because of the violence caused by the Zetas to go live in Canada. So there's a lot of Mexicans in Canada, and I guarantee you there's some guys that are tied into all these cartels, you know, and not only what you might not see is the violence and all these things that you saw in Mexico over the weekend, but you have, you know, the banking industry, the money laundering. There's other aspects of organized crime that they can use to their advantage in another country like Canada.
Well, we know, so TD Bank, which is a Canadian bank, was hit with the largest fine in American history. They got hit with a $3.1 billion fine for laundering money for the cartels. Again, Sam Cooper is really our premier investigative journalist. I mean, top tier, top shelf journalist in Canada. He's covered this. He has drawn the links between the triads, Chinese organized crime, the IRGC networks that are here, the Khalistani Indian networks, and the cartels that are all operational here. They're all working, together in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, it appears
Right.
that the Chinese are the money, the cartels are the muscle, the IRGC functions as their intelligence arm, and the Khalistani networks are the distribution branch of it. That's what it looks like. But
Right.
the problem that we have here in Canada is that Canadian liberals, which is like 85% of the country, are in this deep state of denial where they just don't want to believe that anything that President Trump has said about what's happening here is actually happening. Did you encounter that type of resistance during your time in the DEA, any time that you dealt with Canada?
Well, I had the opportunity to go to Vancouver one year, and I was not there long enough to really get a feel for what the country is like. I did speak to some counterparts, and you know that meeting did not go very favorably. Actually, I told the agents that accompanied me to that meeting. I said, I feel like I'm in Mexico because this guy pretty much insulted me to my face, man. And just for the sake of diplomacy and not creating antagonism from my folks that had to work there, I just didn't respond, So, but I don't know. I think it's the way I felt. It was like I was comparing it to Mexico because it seemed like they didn't want us to be there. Our presence was not wanted, and I don't know why, for whatever reason, because we're all law enforcement. We all have the same goal, and then that's just my opinion from what I observed when I was there. So what I did take away from my visit down there is the financial structure that these guys they covet over there, because I'm really not familiar with Canadian banking laws, but it seems that these guys want to use it to their advantage, and I think they did, based on what you just told me about that indictment. So
Yeah, the problem with Canadian laws is that we just, again, the way our legal system is structured, it's as if we're a Scandinavian country in the early 1980s with a population of 2 million people. That's the way our laws, like, for example, we have two laws here, the Jordan law and the Stinchcombe law. The Jordan law, I might have this backwards, but the Jordan law stipulates that in the case of a criminal charge that's going to trial, the investigators have to disclose all of their evidence to the defense before the case goes to trial. So you're giving the defense the ability to create a bulletproof defense, right? Like there's how are you going to there's nothing you can drop on them that they're not expecting, and if you do, it's stricken from the record. And then the second is the Stinchcombe law, which stipulates that a case has to go to trial within a certain period of time, or else it's thrown out. And when you're talking about these giant money laundering and racketeering cases, I mean, it takes years to put them together. Right? Once you apprehend the individuals, now you have to put the case together, which takes years and years. And so most of the course cases never make it to trial. Furthermore, we don't have RICO laws here. Right. So basically what has happened is you have a political class in Canada that is more than happy to take funding from groups like the United Front Work Department, which operate as extensions of the CCP, which operate in tandem with Chinese organized crime, who are working with cartels to move methamphetamine and fentanyl from Canada into the United States and abroad. Right. And there's just no accountability. The justice system isn't equipped to deal with it. The police don't even know the beginnings of it, like our RCMP, our federal police. I told you the story before we started recording, but I'll repeat it here because me and Sam talked about it on a previous episode. There was an instance where the DEA was tracking a huge shipment of cocaine going up to Canada through the United States. The DEA had them dead to rights. They had a lock on them. They were ready to move. And because the people who were implicated in this were Canadian, the RCMP and the CBSA, which is the Canadian Border Services Agency, had told the DEA to back off, that they'll apprehend them once they come across the border. That truck went through the border and nothing happened. Right? So that's the thing, is like Canada's basically a lame duck, and it's being completely used in every way, shape, and form by organized crime, and we're not equipped to deal with it. We're still in a state of denial. We still don't even believe it's happening here, right? And so that brings me to my next. Sorry, Leo, do you have something to add there?
I was going to say, what you just described to me is pretty much the way it was in Mexico, the way it is. I mean, the legal system, everything you just said, it feels like if I could put a Mexican, they would probably say the same thing that you just told me. The judicial system needs a lot of reform. The corruption exists everywhere, and it's just really difficult to do your job. But as agents, we gotta keep plugging away, and it's unfortunate, but we just have to somehow get the job done.
Well, that's the thing, and the other part about it too is the resistance that you experienced when you were in Vancouver still exists here. Like the DEA and the FBI have offered on a number of occasions to step in and help us to take care of this problem. Basically said, let us take this thing over. We can do it. And the Canadians say, no, we got it covered. Right. So what happens is this distrust develops because the American agencies are like, why are they doing this? We can handle this. We can bring these guys to the United States. We can convict them and put them in jail forever. But the RCMP and the CBSA, which I don't know if it's just straight up corruption or if it's more to do with ego and them wanting to be the ones to be the heroes in the story. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but nothing happens here. And so now there's this disconnect between our agencies where, for example, with this operation that happened in Mexico to extract El Mencho, Canada wasn't even notified. We weren't even told that this was going to happen. And that is a huge intel break, right? It's a huge breakage in communications and says a lot because the United States obviously didn't alert the Canadian authorities because they were worried that the CJNG and El Mencho would have been tipped off beforehand. So,
absolutely, they kept this operation under wraps, because there's too many leaks. The more people know about it, the more chances there is for a leak. And that's the same thing that happened to us in Mexico many times. So sometimes we wouldn't, we just would keep a really tight ship as to who had the information, so for that very reason. And, I had somebody call me yesterday because, as you may have seen, there was a lot of tourists trapped in Puerto Vallarta, Canadians and United States citizens. Well, why weren't we notified that this was going to happen? So you think that the DEA is going to call you and say, hey, look, be careful because we're going to do this operation tomorrow. So heads up. Everybody would have known, so there's no way we're going to notify somebody. So, and in the case of Canada, well, unless, and there's, the phrase, unless you have a need to know, you're not going to know. So I'm pretty sure that has something to do with it.
Yeah, probably. So I know it's getting late over there, Leo. I'm not going to hold you too much longer. I just have maybe two more questions for you, and then I'll let you go to bed. I wanna set our sights on Venezuela now because a lot has been made of a similar extraction, right? They went in, surgically removed Maduro, got him out of there, and there's you're seeing a lot of argument and narrative spin on the internet about Venezuela as a narco state. So yourself, having the knowledge that you have, is Venezuela, or have they historically been operating as a narco state?
Definitely, without a doubt, 100%. And that's why Maduro was there. I mean, like I told you earlier, that El Mencho groomed some folks to take over his spot once he was gone. The same thing with Venezuela. You had the previous leader and Maduro. Maduro was groomed by the previous leader to take this spot so that they could have continuity in their philosophy and continue aiding, Colombia and the FARC and everybody to get their drugs and use Venezuela as a staging area to send drugs to all parts of the world, including Europe, Mexico, and then the United States. So, yeah, absolutely. This has been going on for a long time.
Yeah. So when we're seeing images of boats exploding in the ocean, and this argument that these are just fishermen, what are we seeing there? Like, are we seeing negligence on behalf of the United States, just blowing innocent fishermen out of the water, or are these strategic strikes? Like, what are we seeing when we see this footage on the internet?
Well, I really don't have enough information for that, but I can tell you this, that these guys, you may not see like a ton of cocaine in those boats that they're operating, but they're on a mission. They're probably going to meet another boat and transport something from there or whatever. There's so many scenarios that can be taking place that we don't know about. But the public sees a boat with 5 supposed fishermen get blown up, and they're like, "Oh, those guys were innocent." But no, a lot of times some of the loads are dropped in the ocean, and you use some of these boats to pick them up and take them to a certain point. So, I mean, there's so many scenarios that can be used and where they use these kind of boats. But at this point, I really don't have the information. I do have one of my friends that used to be the agent in charge in Venezuela, and I'll have him come on your show one of these days.
Hell yeah, man. You guys could both come on together. Now, Leo, final question. Reading the news today, there was a Cuban Coast Guard open fire on an American vessel. I believe they killed 5 people, or there was 9 people, somewhere between 5 and 9 people. We also know that Maduro's guard was mostly Cuban intelligence. What do the Cubans have to do with all this?
Well, Cuba is also it's a staging area. I mean, again, there's really, it's a lawless country. Corruption is rampant, and it can be easily used as a staging area for Venezuelan organized crime. Not only Venezuela or Colombia, but you got all sorts of players. You've got Iran, you've got China, you've got all these entities that can go in there and safely meet or conduct their activities in these countries without fear of apprehension. So that's where they're a key role right now, and their proximity to the United States is another key factor in all of this. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that story's just starting to emerge, because even to me, it was news that Cuba even had an intelligence service. So it's, when I was reading that part of the story with Maduro, that's an interesting part of it, where he's surrounded by Cuban intelligence, and those were most of the guys who were killed in the extraction.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's fascinating.
Right. Yeah. So we're hoping to learn more of the story, as time goes on. So.
Well, Leo, you know what? As we learn more, I'm going to have you back on. I'm going to drag you. I have your phone number now, so I'm going to drag you in here a few more times. Well, listen, Leo, before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, I am on X, LX Silva 1, and I have my website. I have a blog on my website that you can go in there and read some of the stories that I put out. It's leosilvaauthor.com. So I'm on all of the platforms on social media, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, all of them. So I can be found there. But the best way is leosilvaauthor.com.
And guys, if you want to read Leo's book, the link to Reign of Terror is directly below this video. If you're watching on YouTube or Substack, if you are listening on an audio streamer, it is in the episode description. Guys, I cannot recommend this book enough. I'm going to crack it open as soon as it arrives from Amazon. But I know a lot of your story because I've listened to you quite a bit. And Leo, man, I don't know what was driving you all those years, but man, I do got to say, dude, you are one of the bravest, most courageous human beings I have ever had the pleasure to speak to, but also just listen to. Like, the stories are wild, man. Like, we just grazed the surface. Let's just say that. It's been a wild ride for you, my friend. So on that note, Leo, thank you so much for your time tonight, man. I really appreciated you taking time to talk to me, and I look forward to talking again in the future.
Well, me too, and I'll be on anytime you ask me to, man. So just give me a call.
Dude, don't tell me that. I'll have you on every week, Leo.